The good thing about being in third place is you try really hard to get out of it. Let's talk about Korg, the early 80s, and the Poly-800. Stay with us. Hi, I'm Zach Marr from Alamo Music here in San Antonio, Texas. You can find us online at alamomusic.com. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button, turn your notifications. This is our Alamo Sound Lab channel where we talk about all things music tech related. And today we're talking about the Korg Poly-800 and asking the question, is it worth it? Today, in today's market, is it a good vintage synth to own? So in order to answer that, we're going to look at the history a little bit, talk about the synth and listen to it, and conclude with some final thoughts. So the Poly-800 fits into this lineage that Korg has in the late 70s and early 80s, where they were the scrappy Japanese synth company that was playing catch up, trying to create and be innovative and come in at a budget price point with their competitors Roland and Yamaha and the American synth companies like Sequential. They were kind of targeting affordability and being innovative in ways that they produce synths that allow you to get certain kind of sounds at a more affordable price point. The beginning of that was the Poly-6, released in 1981, around the same time as the Mono Poly, which both very interesting pieces. They were kind of a budget Jupiter or a budget Prophet 5. Also looks and feels a lot like a Juno 60. Although the Juno 60 came out after the Poly-6. Very cool piece. After the Poly-6, there was the Poly-61, and then after the Poly-61, there was the Poly-800. And the Poly-800's claim to fame in 1983, I think it was their first synth with MIDI, very basic MIDI, didn't have SysX, but it also was under the price point of $1,000, which made it incredibly high value and affordable for that time. No one else was at that price point, and it took other synth companies a number of years to catch up and get there to offer a programmable poly analog synth for under $1,000. So this was the most successful of the Poly-6 and the 61. The 800 proved to be the most successful because it was the go-to instrument for musicians strapped for cash at the time. It is also notable in that it's paraphonic. It only has a single filter, so it's a little interesting when you play. It has two modes, re-triggering or just not re-triggering in terms of when you play, and that kind of changes your style when you're playing and the sounds that you get out of it, so you have to kind of adapt to it when you play it. But it was designed to be a affordable kind of polysynth that you could take and perform with. It had 8 voices. If you stacked the 2 DCOs that it had, it would go to 4 voices, but you could get more complex sounds. There were a couple versions. There's a Mark I and a Mark II, and the difference is that in the Mark II, they also added a digital delay as opposed to a chorus that you find in the Mark I. There's also an inverted key version that makes it kind of look like a combo organ, like a Vox combo organ, which is kind of cool. Other notable things, it has a 6-stage envelope, which allows for some complex kind of time usages for the envelopes, which is kind of signature in the Korg DW 6000, 8000 synths that came out after this. This was kind of a stepping stone between the Poly-6, 61, and the later hybrid DW 6000, DW 8000 synths. And it also is the crescendo in the synth line for Korg that ends up with the Korg M1 and kind of establishes Korg as a kind of #1 synth player for a time. Definitely they were playing chase in the earlier 80s, but later became very dominant, especially with the release of the M1. Taking dominance both from Yamaha with its DX7 that kind of ruled the mid-80s, and Roland D50, which never completely had its moment, kind of always was overshadowed by the DX7 and then the Korg M1. But definitely that's when Korg crescendoed and kind of became legendary in its own right. Not necessarily because the synths from this era, the early era, are bad, because the monopoly is awesome, so is the Poly-6, so is a lot of the early mono synths from Korg. There's a lot of, and the Trident, there's a lot of very cool synths from this era, but definitely not as, they weren't as successful or as sought after at the time. Other notable things about the Poly-800 is that you can mod it. There's actually a filter mod that allows you to go from 4-pole to 2-pole. The filter that's in there is a Korg proprietary filter. I think it's also used in the DW6000 and 8000, and it has the ability to switch filter modes. They didn't make it that way, but people hot rod it and allow you to do it, which is kind of cool. You can also, there's a rack mount version, the EX800, that has, I think, SysX capability, and you can update there's kind of aftermarket firmware updates that allow you to get SysX accessibility on these units as well. Cool that it has MIDI. It sounds pretty nice. I think it's very organic, warm, fun to play. It's got some good patches in it, the kind of presets. The programming it is a little tedious, but not terrible. It's got a nice map on the front, so it's not that hard. Just kind of plug in the parameter you want to change, and you change the parameter. Not too hard. Other things of note, it has 3 envelopes, noise generator, LFO, it's got a 256 note sequencer, all kind of standard fare things, nothing super unique, but its price point was really aggressive at the time, and it's got its own kind of Korg sound. I think it's pleasant. Let's take a listen and conclude with thoughts as to whether it is worth it in today's market and what they go for with pricing, etc. Let's take a listen. So there you have it, the Poly-800. There's a lot of patches online that you can download and plug in and get cool sounds. This was a fairly popular synth, so a lot of people spent a lot of time with it. It's got a fan base. Let's talk about, is it worth it? I think, it's fairly inexpensive still. You can find them anywhere from $200 to $400, so it's pretty affordable on the vintage market. It's also pretty limited, being a paraphonic synth. I do like the way it sounds. I think it's very pleasant. I think it has some interesting, with its envelopes allowing for some interesting kind of movement in a patch. You can do some fun things. Paraphonic also is always interesting. It forces you to play slightly differently, which is fun from a creative standpoint. That limitation can actually breed a lot of creativity when you're playing. So yeah, I think, it's definitely, if you're looking for a DCO analog synth on a budget, this is a really good option. Its competitor at the time was kind of the Juno 106, which was a lot more expensive and a lot more revered and has a bigger following, and on the secondhand market runs a lot more expensive than the Poly-800. So I think that it's not the most unique sound, but if you really want a vintage analog synth, it's a very affordable way to get into it, and it's got a good overall tone. It's got a very nice vintage analog sound. I think it really excels in pads and kind of plucked string piano sounds. I like both of those sounds out of it. It's not the thickest synth, but it's got a pleasant tone. So not the most interesting thing to add to your palette, but definitely not the most expensive. So I would say it's probably worth it if you don't have a big collection and you're looking to get into vintage synths. Not a bad entry point. Still very affordable. And from a tonal standpoint, it is got that warm early 80s sound that's nice. So I would say you can't go wrong. It's probably not going to go down in value, and they're not. It's decent sounding. It sounds good. So that's my opinion. Would love to hear your thoughts. What do others think? Is it worth it? Is it overrated? Are there other options at this price point in the used market? What are some modern options? Would love to hear your thoughts. Please leave them below. Thank you for watching, and if you wanted to talk more, find us at alamomusic.com. You can email, phone call, chat with us. Love to hear from you there, and leave any ideas you have or comments below. Would also love to hear from you there. Thanks for watching today, and until next time.